They had convinced themselves they were preparing to fight the Antichrist and to do battle with the enemy. According to the Christian militia group Hutaree, the enemy is anyone working for the government. Well, according to a Harris poll, nearly a quarter of Republicans, the Antichrist might be the current president. The FBI arresting 8 over the weekend, 5 in southern Michigan, 3 in Ohio and Indiana. One person still at large. All 9 of the members of this Christian militia group, Hutaree, indicted on multiple charges, including seditious conspiracy, sedition, and attempted use of weapons of mass destruction. Court documents revealing Hutaree members were plotting to kill a police officer, then bomb the officer's funeral procession in order to kill others. The New York Times reporting that group members considered local and state police as foot soldiers for the federal government, which they viewed as the enemy. Federal agents say the group was preparing to take some type of action next month. The group's own website, more specific, revealing a training exercise was planned for the 24th of April. Under surveillance for over a year, and with the website noting it is preparing for the end-time battles to keep the testimony of Jesus Christ alive, court documents fleshed out the madness, quoting, "It is believed by the Hutaree that this engagement would then serve as a catalyst for a more widespread uprising against the government." TPM reporting the group was preparing to fight the Antichrist because, quote, "Jesus wanted us to be ready to defend ourselves using the sword and stay alive using equipment." Joining me now, as promised, Mark Potok, the director of the Intelligence Project for the Southern Poverty Law Center. Thanks for some of your time tonight, sir.
Well, pleasure to see you, Keith. Glad to see you back.
Thank you. This predates healthcare reform, predates the presidency. What is the provenance of this group? Do you know?
Well, apparently they started way back in 2008. They were very little noticed initially. We caught wind of them in early 2009 and actually have them listed as, one of many, many militia groups that appeared recently. They really look like they essentially are a family and some friends, although they also have what is apparently a very small chapter in Utah that I'm guessing was not involved in this. It's a strange group, as you've suggested already. It sounds very similar to other militia groups in its sort of identification of the government as an evil entity in all of this. But as you say, they don't target the so-called New World Order. They target the Antichrist, which I guess is essentially a Christian millennial version of what the New World Order will be when the day comes.
All of this, of course, obviously making everyone think back to the Homeland Security Department report that was released last April that warned of this type of extremism and its growth, and it was mocked by the right wing, saying that this is just an attempt to put down conservative political values. But I mean, how many times have we seen in the last year that this report was, if anything, understating the reality out there?
I think that's precisely right, and that's really what we said at the time. The reality was that the infamous DHS report of last April was spot on. It had a very good analysis of what was going on there. It very much mirrored our own completely independent findings down here. And it was vilified by groups like the American Legion and other right-wing groupings. The shame of it, really, from my point of view, is that the Secretary of DHS essentially apologized for it and repudiated it. And there, if one actually read the report, there was nothing in there that was tendentious, that identified conservatives as potential Timothy McVeighs, or any of the rhetoric. The fact is, it was a sober, straight-ahead assessment of what was going on, and we're seeing precisely what was essentially predicted in that report now.
And your reporting, your group said that in the last year, the militias and other similar type groups are up by 244%. The numbers, the sheer amount of material they have available to them, have we ever seen anything like it before in this country?
I really haven't. It's not the militias, the growth of the militias and related patriot groups is absolutely explosive in the last year. In addition to that, we had a huge growth, some 80% in the number of the very hardline anti-immigration groups, the Minutemen and so on, and we have record numbers of hate groups. So you put all that together, and what we really saw was about a 40% increase in the number of these groups. They all add up to something like 1,700 groups. And that doesn't even tell the whole story, because we see a great deal of the rhetoric and ideology and, in many cases, conspiracy theories and streaks of racism of these groups entering larger formations like the Tea Parties. I think that's very clear.
Do you have any idea, is there a number to put on what kind of overlap there are between these nut groups like the Hutaree, and the ordinary people who may not have anything like this in mind, who are in groups like the Tea Party? When those two circles overlap, what size is the overlap?
Well, I'd say two things. First of all, undoubtedly the vast majority of people actually in militia groups do not contemplate the mass murder of police officers. Mm-hmm. That's fairly unusual even for these nutty groups. You know, the overlap with the Tea Parties is hard to measure, but what we know is a whole number of things. We know that the Tea Parties, or many of their leaders and participants, have adopted a lot of the conspiracy-oriented rhetoric. There is a secret plan by Mexico to invade the country. There may be a string of FEMA concentration camps out there that the government is preparing for good patriotic Americans. We see, for instance, at coming April 19th, a very major Second Amendment rally in Washington, a gun rights rally, that there will be major leaders from various patriot groups, like Richard Mack, a former sheriff from Arizona, who's part of the Oath Keepers organization. So there's really a great deal of overlap, and I think you hear it in much of the rhetoric of the Tea Party leaders. Certainly you hear it. You're right. Mark Potok of the Southern Poverty Law Center. Again, great thanks for your time. And thank you. Incredibly, one right-wing fringe group has done the right thing, though its motives for doing so may be questioned. Practical evidence that if you tell right-wing whack jobs to show up, quote, locked, loaded, and ready, they will bring their guns. The surprise is what the leader of their group did then. Ahead on Countdown. Tonight's quick comment. Well, it's the standard liberal claptrap. Somebody on the far right goes way too far with their new language of violence, especially gun violence, and then comes the immediate outcry that we have to back away from the edge of this cliff because whether or not meant as metaphor, there are sickos out there who will happily take it literally. It is almost a catechism by now, except that in Arizona, both parts in the little play have now been performed by the same person. Her name is Carmen Mercer, and she is, or was, the president of the MCDC, the Minuteman Civil Defense Corps. Its anti-immigration members stand watch on the U.S. border. Cynics say they stand around. Anyway, 13 days ago, they got an email from Ms. Mercer urging a change in their own rules that would permit them to not just report illegals and international drug carriers, but to track them. Angry over a claim that the border was now secure, and of course angry over health care reform, Ms. Mercer urged her membership to go to the border to protest. You are strongly encouraged, she wrote, to exercise your rights and duty as an American citizen to carry a long arm, and if challenged, use it to defend the United States of America. She added the volunteers should come locked, loaded, and ready. Guess what happened next? Carmen Mercer suddenly found out that a surprisingly large number of her email correspondents took her literally. People are ready to come locked and loaded, and that's not what we're all about. She now says it only takes one bad apple to destroy everything we've done for the last 8 years. Apparently, Ms. Mercer misunderstood her membership. When she said locked, loaded, and ready, she did not think this would translate as bring your guns to a bunch of nutbags looking to shoot people who do not look like them, as one Minuteman member allegedly did last year, killing an immigrant and his 9-year-old daughter. Ms. Mercer thought they'd get the subtle imagery she obviously intended. To her credit, when the scales suddenly fell from her eyes, she did something unexpected. On Friday, Carmen Mercer and her board of directors voted to dissolve the Minuteman Corporation because for whichever reason, people taking locked, loaded, and ready literally was way too much for her. Perhaps there is a lesson in this for a much more high-profile agitator who does not understand the stupidity of her own supporters and who recently advised them, don't retreat, instead, reload.